Hey, this is JP coming back to you. Um, been trying to get to this, so I decided to do it a different way. Know that I discussed talking about um, the book, um, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, but it's so hard for me to do it at a time where I think that people will be on. So what I'm going to start doing is recording it here on YouTube, posting it in the group, and then I'll go live to discuss it. That way I don't have to have everybody gone because it's hard to get the babies away and everything else, and able to go live with you all to actually read this. But it'd be different if we're just discussing it. Um, Left off last time where we were talking about Congress had cut off the money to Reagan when he was dealing with the Contras over in, what was it, Venezuela, and dealing with them and the Sandinistas and all of them. So they started utilizing the trade of weapons as well as using drug dealers to create the funds to fund the Contras. So we picked up, it was still a while before Oliver North. A note was found around July the 12th in 1985 about the Contras arms warehouse in Honduras, so Honduras, not Venezuela. $14 million to finance came from drug money. $14 million. Also, in 1986, an FBI informant inside the Medellin cartel, their name was Wanda Palacio. She testified that she had seen the organization run by Jorge Ochoa loading cocaine into an aircraft that belonged to Southern Air Transport, which is a company which was owned by the CIA. Again, the CIA all the way back from its inception, pretty much, dealing with Lucky Luciano, dealing with in the Vietnam War, dealing with the individuals in the peninsula, the Golden Triangle. Sorry, and then we talked about Mr. Michael Hand, who started the bank over in Australia with over few $1 billion in Australian money, and so now we're even moving on forward and still seeing the CIA is very entangled in this. And all of this history is to help us understand where a lot of our conflicts come from when it comes to dealing with other nations, where a lot of the transactions that are going on, and we can start to see how and why certain individuals are seen as criminalized or almost being herded into a criminalized mentality. Not everybody is forced to go in there, but you're kind of herded in a direction which kind of propagates or makes it more likely for it to happen. There was a strong corroboration for her story, but somehow the Justice Department rejected it as inconclusive. Amazing how it's always inconclusive when they don't want it to be, but let a normal Joe, let somebody do something. It doesn't have to even be without a shadow of a doubt. It is what it is. They just do what they do. Senator John Kerry actually started looking into all of this, and he said at one closed door committee meeting, it is clear that there is a network of drug trafficking through the Contras. There are specific law enforcement officials that will tell you that they have been called off of trafficking investigations because the CIA was involved, or because it would threaten national security. It always amazes me how national security is in play when all it's really doing is protecting a few players or some individuals that are higher up. You know, when we look at all of the different councils over the years, whether it's assassinations, whether it's all of these different things, it's a matter of national security. Nobody else outside of America is caring the crap that the nation is doing inside here, the corruption that's going on. So it's not a matter of national security, it's a matter of personal security. There are specific law. Okay, we hit that part. or because it would threaten national security. All of this while we are spending millions of dollars supposedly fighting this war on drugs. Now, they're having their own drug plethora going on, or their own drug enigma going on, but they're in the country. We're talking about a war on drugs, and we know who that war was focused at. This was a phrase that was actually first coined by Richard Nixon back in 1969. This is what have to get us to understand. When we look at economics, we can't look at economics without history, without society or social issues, and different things like that. Because if we don't understand history and we don't understand societal issues and what's going on around the government, it'll never really make sense how all of these things all tie in together. So here's the real double standard. As all of these aforementioned events were going on simultaneously in 1986, after Len Bias, the star basketball player that was drafted by the Celtics, had died of a supposed cocaine overdose, even though the coroner found no link between him sniffing some cocaine, again, sniffing some cocaine, and the heart failure, because we know at that time it was reported that he died smoking crack. So sniffing cocaine. Congress proceeded to pass an anti-drug abuse law, or act. Up until this time, throughout the entire history of the nation, there had only been 56 mandatory minimum sentences throughout the whole time of this nation's inception, or since its inception. Now, overnight, there were 29 more. So over a 50% increase in just one night, and all focused at the war on drugs. Even for minor possession cases, you couldn't even get parole. They established a 100-to-1 sentencing on crack cocaine, which we know was flooded into the African American neighborhoods, especially in California, to the Bloods and Crips, and then it kind of spread its way from there. But that was what was given 100-to-1, as opposed to, we know that when this really started rolling, Ronald Reagan, a former actor, was in the presidency, but powder cocaine, which pharmaceutically or molecularly is the same product as the crack cocaine, just formatted in a different way, in a solid as opposed to a powder. But there's a 100-to-1 sentencing ratio. This was only recently changed a little bit when President Obama went out. I think he changed it to 18-to-1. Still should be 1-to-1. This was at the same time that they were knowingly running crack into this country as part of financing the Contras. In November 1986 is when the Iran-Contra affair came to light. The nation was selling arms to Iran, which was breaking an arms embargo in order to fund the Contras. 14 Reagan administration officials got charged with crimes and were convicted, including the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger. Of course, when these individuals were convicted, Vice President Bush, who we've already talked about, was very involved in a number of things, especially dealing with Noriega and a few other individuals. He was vice president. So we know that after Reagan, he did become president and pardoned all of them. None of this drug running was even discussed in the televised House committee hearings that made Oliver North a household name. The 1,000-page report offered by Senator Kerry about his committee's findings did discuss how the department had paid more than $800,000 to known traffickers to take humanitarian assistance to the Contras. So you want to lock a person up for life, or as long as you possibly can, for selling drugs to try to feed their children, but then there should be no consequence to funding a whole other regime and their quest to take over their country. Okay, again, we've got to understand this stuff if we really want to get to mass incarceration and see how all of this ties in. The New York Times then set out to trash Kerry in a three-part series, including belittling him for relying on the testimony of imprisoned drug-running pilots. We know that the congressional individuals and the administration of Reagan and Bush weren't going to tell it. So who else are they going to get testimony from? Police don't mind getting testimony from individuals that are informants that have been locked up, and you're giving them money and different assistance to go out and tell things. So what's the difference? The Washington Post published a short article heavy on criticism against Kerry by the Republicans. Newsweek called him a randy conspiracy buff. In 1987, the House Narcotics Committee decided that there should be more investigation into the Contra drug allegations, but the Washington Post headline said the Hill panel finds no linkings to Contra's drug smuggling. That lets you know, and you see why we're talking a lot now about freedom of press. This is why you see President Trump talk so much about fake news, because he knows all of it's fake. It's about propaganda, but he doesn't like it when it comes back on him and his fake news or alternative facts. My fault. The paper would not even run Chairman Charles Rangel's letter of correction. That same time, that same year, a Time correspondent had an article on this correction. That that article subject blocked and was blocked by a senior editor who privately told him that this institution is behind the Contras. If the story was about the Sandinistas and drugs, then he would have no problem getting the article in the magazine. But in 1990, President Bush had ordered the military to invade Panama. The stated reason was because their leader, Manuel Noriega, I'm sorry, we hadn't even gotten to that part that I was talking about earlier, had been violating our laws by permitting drugs to run through his country. So now it's a problem for him to run them through his country, but it's no problem for us to flood them into ours. Okay, so again, he was breaking our laws by allowing drugs to be run through his country. Noriega had been one of our allies for a long time. Noriega eventually was brought to the U.S. and convicted by a federal jury in Miami and sentenced to 40 years. Filmmaker Oliver Stone went to interview him, and he candidly said that he had spied on Fidel Castro for the U.S., had given covert aid to the Contras, and visiting with Oliver North. Noriega and Bush went way back to when Bush headed the CIA in 1976. The defense team for Noriega had a brief that was heavily censored, but it revealed ongoing contact with Bush over a 15-year period. While he was vice president, Bush had headed up a special anti-drug effort called the South Florida Task Force. This just happened to coincide with when quite a few cargoes of cocaine and marijuana came through Florida as part of the Contra support network, and was demanding the nation. He demanded that the nation went after Noriega because he knew too much, and was wanting to make sure that he was didn't want to keep taking this big of a cut from the agencies due to their drug dealing. Bill Clinton might not be exempt either. A small airport in Mena, Arkansas, happened to have been the center for an international drug smuggling ring between 1981 and 85, which is when Clinton was the governor of the state of Arkansas. Barry Seal, which the movie that came out, Made in America, that's who this was about, kept his plane in Mena, and he smuggled somewhere between $3 to $5 billion in drugs into this country, and he was also part of the Reagan administration's efforts to implicate the Sandinistas in drug trafficking. So I'm going to hold up right there because, again, I don't want to make these too long, but I do want us to start getting to where we can discuss them and have some conversation as we get ready to go into the actual book. So, again, this is JP on behalf of For People's Choice, looking for people's change. Let's have a good one.